Good evening. Tonight is the 28th of January. We are in Vancouver, and this is the LaRouche meeting. And tonight I will explore the first week of the Trump presidency and the paradoxes and opportunities and dangers that lie before us. And the first paradox I want to go through is the paradox of Make America Great Again. And the cause of America's decline, especially since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, is the promotion of a post-industrial, global, anti-development, imperial New World Order. And this is not what Trump has said. What Trump has said is we have been letting other nations take advantage of us. We can't let other nations take advantage of us. So the question is, does Trump actually know why or how the United States became a post-industrial junk heap? Does Trump know that this is in essence a creation of a globally extended British empire reorganized since the war, with the U.S. as the enforcer? Okay, so on this point, Theresa May visited the U.S. yesterday, she visited, first she met with the Republican congressional delegation that was in a retreat in Philadelphia. Mind you, he doesn't even, as one of our, as a friend of mine said, he hasn't yet found the bathroom in the White House, and Elizabeth May has arrived. Theresa May has arrived. I keep saying Elizabeth. I think Queen Elizabeth is in my head. Anyhow, so Theresa May has arrived, and she meets with speaks to the Republican congressional retreat. And then yesterday she meets with Trump, and they have a press conference. And now, her intervention was incredibly well crafted and tailored and coordinated with all the anti-Trump operations. And this is really something to behold. Okay? You got to get this. Her line was, Trump's remarkable victory is a signal for the U.S. and Britain now to renew their special relationship in a different way. Now, what kind of special relationship did the British have with Obama? Well, they had a very tight special relationship with Obama, but Obama's gone. So now we want to renew the special relationship. And so how does she approach it? The renewal is now based on praising the Brexit. Right? The Brexit was a good thing because it freed Great Britain from the shackles of Europe. But at the same time that she's praising the Brexit, the bureaucracy in Great Britain is trying to delay the actual technical aspects of the departure of Great Britain from the Euro, and they're dragging their feet every which way you can imagine. So there's a double thing, there's a two-facedness here. And, but now, we are now, and because of that, a new special relationship can be had, and with an America which wants to make itself great again, and a new Great Britain that wants to make itself great again, with the new America that wants to make itself great again.
Great Britain.
I love this. I love this. Okay, not to mention that the Anglo-Americans created the euro to contain Europe. And and so forth. And it was the euro and the European Union was, and the euro was a major pillar of power, of control over European nations, so they wouldn't do things for themselves or that was in their interest. So I got, this is amazing. And what did Elizabeth May say in the press conference? She wants to bring jobs to the working class of Great Britain. What is Trump saying? I want to bring jobs to the working class of Great Britain. Okay. So the question is, does Trump understand what he's dealing with? The very people who have put articles out discussing his assassination in the German media, in the US media, and the British media, and the very dossier which was circulated by MI6, designed to mislead everyone into thinking that Trump was being blackmailed by the Russians. The very people who did that are now saying, we, the special relationship. Okay? Does he understand what the game is? Or could he be made to understand it if he doesn't understand it? We don't know. But we do know that we have to get across that this special relationship with the British has to end. And that the United States has to act in its own interest. Now, what's even more amazing is the response of the Chinese and the Russians. The Russians' response to the situation on the day that Elizabeth May, I keep saying Elizabeth May, Theresa May, I got the problem.
Anyway,
Theresa May and Trump had the press conference on the same day. Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, is quoted as saying in response, although he didn't say he was responding to that, but this is the response. We believe that as Russia, the US, and China build their relations, this triangle should not be closed or directed towards some projects that could worry other states. No one needs to be threatened. That's my interjection. Quote, they should be open and fair. I am concerned that the economic structure of Russia, I am convinced that the economic structure of Russia, the United States, and China is such that there is a great deal of complementarity in the material and economic sphere. As for international security problems, these three countries play a very important role. Russia and China have restrained attempts to introduce confrontational, force-based solutions into world politics. We expect that Donald Trump, who has confirmed his commitment to focus primarily on U.S. domestic problems and to abandon interference in the internal affairs of other states, will do the same. Okay. So he's saying it pretty straightforward in diplomatic parlance that they expect Trump, to work with them, but not against any other force. Now, then in response to Lavrov, a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said the following: China, Russia, and the U.S. are the leading global powers, and they are the permanent members of the UN Security Council. We have great responsibility for global peace, stability, and development. Therefore, China plans to intensify cooperation with the U.S. and Russia and to make common contributions to solving the tasks and challenges of the modern world. So, the timing of this is right when Theresa May is in the U.S. And Theresa May came to the U.S. probably before Trump has discovered all the bathrooms in the White House. So what does this say? America, keep your special relationship with Great Britain against Russia and China and the world, or join the world. But more importantly, all this stuff in the British and U.S. press of Trump getting Russia to break with China is not a real possibility. Does this also mean that everyone is in on this game of the British and the British American special relationship? I mean, are they in on that's what it is? Now, if Trump really means we have to let other nations take it, if Trump really means the United States has let other nations take advantage of the United States, does he mean the British Empire? Or does he know that if there's anybody who's taking advantage of the United States, it's the British? You might also include the Israelis, but that's a secondary matter. Now, at the same time, you have Trump meeting with who? This last week, his first week in office. He met with trade union leaders. They were very excited because he says he's going to bring union jobs back. He's going to bring the unions back, and no TPP. No TPP. And that's a big issue with the trade unions. Okay, and then he's meeting with business leaders. And what's he saying to the business? We need industrial development. Removing the regulations on commerce. Removing the regulations that prevent economic development from the green, from the environmentalists. We need industrial development, reindustrialization. One of the things he did was to open the door for water projects because the Obama administration had banned inter-basin water development. So you know, if you have one river basin, you can't connect it to another river basin. You can't connect water between the two basins. It's environmentally prohibitive. Okay. So Trump is talking protectionism. He's talking about reorganizing NAFTA. Is this because Trump has intentions of reversing the post-industrial decline of the U.S. under under the free trade system and the green system? Is he serious about this? And if he were, would the special relationship with the United Kingdom be the best partner for this? No. Or would China and Russia be the best partner for this? That's a question you have to ask. So this is a paradox. This is a paradox. Now, our goal is to define for these people who the actual enemies of the United States are, both internally and externally, in terms of these policies. And the enemies of the United States are those who do not want to see the world develop, want to use the United States militarily and otherwise to destroy development, and in which policy the United States is also destroyed. Who are those forces? Well, a good chunk of them come from Great Britain and the media and George Soros, it's a big one. He has money coming out from the offshore financial structures, from the drug trade, from everything, and he's pumping every operation you can imagine, including the one that is now being promoted to start the impeachment process of Donald Trump on Monday, the first working day of his administration. They began to file impeachment charges in New York State on his conflict of interest. But that's not going into Congress, but that's setting the atmosphere for impeachment. But what has Donald Trump done? Donald Trump is now establishing a relationship with the trade unions, a relationship with the business community and with the military. The military hated Obama for many reasons. I won't go into all the details. So he's establishing his relationship to them, and meanwhile there's this massive hysteria, the biggest women's march in history in the United States against Trump, and all of this, being financed by George Soros and people like that. Now, our goal is to make these things clear. So that is what we're trying to do, is clarify where, so we have an EIR coming out that says crush the British Empire. Now, so the next paradox is this concept of America first. Does this mean make America first and end the globally extended imperial system which is against the interests of the United States? Or does it mean beat up everyone to be the biggest stick and be the first in competition and imposing an imperial system? Does America first mean an American people come first, or the American people as an empire concept comes first? Okay. Does this mean trade war with China? Well, the Chinese are not really that concerned about a trade war because they're not really oriented at this moment to exporting the goods that the United States would produce for themselves. They are looking for much bigger markets like railways and infrastructure. And the Chinese have offered to turn all their treasury obligations, U.S. Treasury obligations, into actual credit for infrastructure development in the United States. Okay, now we come to the next paradox, the issue of walls and what you call sanctuaries in Syria for refugees. So what's going on there? This is also a paradox. Does Trump intend to deport 12 million, an estimated 12 million illegal aliens? Well, what's going on here? Is Trump trying to set up a no-fly zone in Syria? No. What's this whole thing about? What's this whole thing with the sanctuaries? Well, what is going on, one of the possibilities of what's going on is that embedded in the refugees are cells, terrorist cells, sleeper cells that could be activated in Europe and the United States. And that's a matter of great concern, because that is exactly what the British would do to you. They would set you up for terrorist operations that would never end. There's no better way to demoralize a nation than have terrorist operations hit the civilian population without the civilian population having a way of stopping it, without it being stopped. And nothing will corrode and erode the power of a government than being impotent in the face of terrorist cells. So that's a very important, it's called irregular warfare. It's a very important conception. So it appears that the generals that are working with Trump have a very clear understanding that that is going to be a problem. That this ISIS and al-Nusra and the Daesh and all this wasn't just meant for the Middle East. It was a global process being orchestrated and promoted through the Obama administration, indirectly and directly through the British, as an anti-civilizational process of breaking nations down. Okay, so that's one. The other one is to understand that the United States is experiencing an accelerating epidemic of the consumption of every kind of drug you can imagine. And the main distributors of the drug in the United States are the Mexican cartels. And their organization has been working with the Obama administration. They provided a large source of the funding for Obama's 2008-2012 campaigns. They have essentially taken over Mexico to a large degree. It's not a question of bribery anymore. It's a question of do you want your children not to be executed on their way to school? I mean, that's the kind of issue that in Mexico it is. And so, essentially, the borders have become, under Obama, a massive process of of economic refugees who are being used by human traffickers. The women are being raped in the process of coming across. And all the criminal activity involved. And how do you defend your nation against an invasion, which is not an invasion just of illegal immigrants, but it's an invasion of drugs and everything else. So, the wall. We're going to build a wall. We're going to build a wall. Well, you're going to build a wall, right? But that's not going to stop. You're not going to stop that by building a wall. Your only way you're going to stop all of that stuff is if you do three things. You have to, one, collaborate with legitimate elements in Mexico to support them in wiping out the drug cartels, number one. Number two, you have to allow the Chinese to come in to develop Mexico and help that process along so that people have jobs, people are not, and then you have to stabilize the situation with the people who are illegal. You cannot, you can say you're going to build a wall, you can build the biggest and most powerful wall in the world, but it will not, that's not going to solve your problem.
Beautiful.
That's not going to solve your problem. Economic development, shutting down the drug trade. But when you shut down the drug trade, what do? You shut down the financial side of the banking system. The offshore banking system, which is based on the drug trade. So that's a direct assault on the empire right there. So is that what he's planning to do with the wall? Well, maybe it's just a game. He's going to put up a wall, he got the vote from people, and now he's pretending that he's going to do something. Or is he actually intends to do something? We don't know. But who did he appoint to be the enforcer of the war, if he were going to have a war, against the drug trade? The drug trade. Who did he appoint to Homeland Security? A former head of Southern Command, General Kelly. Who's General Kelly? He is a guy who actually is saying that's what you have to do. You have to bring economic development, you have to shut down the drug cartels, and you have to, it's not just stopping illegal immigrants. If you think that's the only thing that this is about, then you're wrong. So he appointed somebody who is known to have those views. Is he going to do that? And can he get the Mexicans to cooperate with him? And how is that going to work? Well, he has to demonstrate to the Mexicans that would cooperate with him that he's not just going to set them up. That it's not a show, it's not a game, it's not another, just say no, operation. That it has to be real. With Putin and the Chechens, he did the same thing with the Chechens. He made it real so that the people who didn't want to be under this terrorist apparatus that was part of the British, long-term British assets and Islamic assets, they were told they would be supported if they took on, they would be backed in the fight against the terrorists, and they did. They succeeded. The same thing in Mexico. If you're going to support the people that actually want to do something, you have to be willing to support them. And that means you can't just say, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. You have to have an actual plan and a policy, and you have to have it. It has to be serious. So right now, the British media is going bonkers right now about the call with Putin, whom the Russians and also I found out that the U.S. has pretty much said the same thing that the Russians have said, that they want to partner in dealing with the Ukraine crisis, ISIS, Iran, Israeli-Palestine, and North Korea. So they weren't just talking about one thing, they were talking about the two of them working together to resolve or clear up these crises. Well, if they're going to do that, these crises, the North Korea crisis, the Palestinian, the Iran, the Ukraine, all these things are absolutely indispensable part of the imperial system. Because what does the Ukrainian crisis do? It prevents Europe from working with Russia and China. That's what the Ukrainian crisis does. It's indispensable. If you have a serious effort on the part of the United States to work with Russia to deal with the mess that the United States created in Ukraine, then that is what has kept Russia from Europe, and Europe from Russia, and Europe from China, and Europe from, and so forth. The same with the Israeli-Palestinian situation. If you try to resolve that crisis and you're serious about it, the two of them, then that removes one of the pillars of constant war, constant crisis that prevents the development of the region. And the same with ISIS. And the same with North Korea. If you in Russia worked together with China and Japan to resolve the Korean situation, that is the bottleneck for the whole development of the northern part of China, the eastern part of Russia, and so forth. So if you're serious about resolving those things, well, yeah, those are part of that process. So if you're serious about that, and you have to be serious about resolving, or is it a matter of just making it look good? Are you serious about it? Now, well, those things in and themselves will take the empire down. This empire we're talking about. Those things, if you do all those things, you essentially wipe them out. You wipe out the financial power, which lives off the terrorism and the drug trade and the speculation and everything else like that. So now we come to the next paradox. The Stephen Mnuchin paradox. Now this guy was appointed to be the Secretary of the Treasury, the Treasury Secretary. And he is known to be a Soros man. And after working with Goldman Sachs, he worked with Soros for 14 years, and then he ran one of Soros's funds and was involved in the whole scam involving IndyMac and which was turned into One West, and you know, massively foreclosed on people. It was extremely brutal, and then he lied before in his Senate confirmation hearings to the senator from Washington State, Cantwell. So, and he said he was. So she confronted him, saying that the Republican platform is stronger on Glass-Steagall than the Democratic platform. And Trump announced he was for Glass-Steagall, and he said, no, it's not. We're for a modern version like the Volcker Rule and blah, 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 blah. Okay, what is that? And then he said that the Federal Reserve had issued a study that Glass-Steagall would shut down the bond markets, or would have a catastrophe. And they never did. They never did put that out. So he lied. So what kind of guy is this? And what's going to happen when the system goes, when the financial system goes? What are they going to do? Are they going to have the policy to deal with it? Or is this guy going to a Soros man? Well, is he still a Soros man, or is he not still a Soros man? I don't know. But this is, now who is Soros? He's basically calling for a massive uprising against Trump. And yet, someone closely involved and connected to Soros has been named the Treasury Secretary. That's another paradox. And then there's the forgotten man paradox, where Trump said, I represent the forgotten man. Who used the term the forgotten man? Before, it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, is this real? And Trump said, I represent you. Washington doesn't represent you. I represent you. I'm bringing government to you. You're the government. I am your representative. What does that mean? Is that just populist, rhetoric? What does it mean? What's it going to mean in concrete terms? We don't know. Now, in this context of all of this that I'm talking about, the president of China in Switzerland at the Davos conference, which is very unusual for the president of China to address the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is, the international financial crowd and corporations and everything. So I've never heard of a Chinese president going there. And what he basically said there was, look, the financial problems are a result of the financiers looting nations, not a question of trade or even free trade. It was a question of predatory financial operations against nations and to loot them. And then he said it more politely, and then he said, we are looking at the fourth industrial revolution, that it is science and technology and the development of rapid advancement of science and technology and the living standards of the world is how we have to go, and it's how we're going to solve our problems. I've never heard anybody say that but Lyndon LaRouche. And he said that we're facing the fourth industrial revolution, whatever that means. And I guess he means fusion or the space program or a lot of technologies. So in this context of his presentation, Japan has, Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, has put a very close associate of his into the position of ambassador to Russia. This is very important.
I'm sorry, what?
Huh?
What did you say?
Abe of Japan,
yeah,
has taken an undersecretary of the foreign ministry and replaced the current ambassador from Japan to Russia with somebody who's very personally close to him.
Okay.
Okay. And discussions are now going on for the development of the Kuril Islands and about allowing the people who used to live there on both sides to go back and live there. So the whole Kuril Island thing is being taken care of. Then, with the new king of Thailand, the Chinese are now preparing to start building the Kra Canal. This is huge. And there was a visit from Ibero-America, of Latin America, to Europe to organize European participation in the building of the bi-oceanic transportation corridors that are now being proposed from the Atlantic and the Pacific. So, and also, the similar process is going on with something that we've been promoting for the longest, many decades, which is the development of Transaco program, to develop the water development of Africa, the central part of Africa. It's called the Transaco program, which is the beginning of the development of Africa. And so there's a lot of Europeans are being brought in to consider, to partner. They're being proposed that they partner with the Chinese in this area. And then the Hungarian head of the central bank began saying the way out for Europe is the one belt, one road. So this is what's going on. This is the reality on the ground. And this is the context in which Trump is going to have to respond. And the British are saying, come with us and make the British Empire great again. Essentially. And all your problems will be solved. Now, here we come to the issue of Canada. You had a foreign minister, Dion, who was opening up relations with Russia. He has been replaced in the context of the Trump president's election with the most rabid anti-Russian person in Canadian politics, Chrystia Freeland, who is part of the Bandera fascist Ukrainian Nazi networks. And so we have to ask ourselves, where is that all? And the implication is that if Trump doesn't go with the British, then Canada is the leader of the free world.
Right.
You should be proud.
Okay.
Okay.
Canada would change the foreign minister.
Okay.
You mean the lost colony there is?
The last was the last white hope. Okay. Now, so
then the Canada will invade US.
I just saw a total freak out on Trump that was shown to me, a 8-minute freak out, or 4-minute freak out, by Stephen Lewis, the former head of the NDP, the son of David Lewis, who helped to create the NDP, the father of Abby Lewis, who is the husband of Naomi Klein. And I just saw it, and the guy went totally berserk.
One of the authors of the Leave Manifesto.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
So I'm going to go to something. I'm going to get risky here and go off the charts with you guys. We have by the way, in the U.S., I should mention, we have a special mobilization to stop the Mnuchin confirmation. His confirmation vote is supposedly coming up Monday evening, and we're going to be mobilizing through Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to try to prevent his confirmation. Now, so I'm about to get into the heart of Lyndon LaRouche's ideas through a back door. On this question of Make America Great Again, there is no possibility of making America great again if it is not involved in the space program or renewed its commitment to fusion. And we have put forward the 4 laws: Glass-Steagall, the credit system, advancing the technology and the industrial base, and going for a crash fusion program and space program, the 4 laws. Now, those 4 laws in that form are now being placed by friends of ours in the state legislatures around the United States into these state legislatures for consideration to be voted up and then used to recommend to the Congress and the President that they adopt these policies. And I think Illinois, Washington State has introduced it just a few days ago. South Carolina may have passed it. I don't know all the states, but it's going in. We have a whole process going on of getting them into the state, get the discussion going at the state legislative levels on the policies of a Hamiltonian banking system, of a credit system, and so forth. Now we have a deeper problem in the transatlantic system, which is this antipathy to scientific and technological development in the general educated population. And you don't have that in the Chinese leadership. I mean, the Chinese are very excited about the space program. They're very excited about all of this. India, too. I think probably the Indian population is also excited about the future that this...
They have already gone to Mars. They have already gone to Mars.
Yeah, they've already gone to Mars. So they're very excited about this. Now, so I'm going to go through this with you. Bear with me. If there's problems, you can ask questions. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, there was a scientist and philosopher and genius by the name of Wilhelm Gottfried Leibniz. And he led a campaign to create a scientific technological revolution around the idea of around the idea of technology, around the idea of finding a way to increase the power of labor through machines. And he was the inspiration to Benjamin Franklin. He was the inspiration to Alexander Hamilton in terms of science. And his tradition through Hamilton and through the Continental Scientific period was very big in that period. And this had a lot to do with the development of Russia later on, the industrial development of Japan later on, the industrial development of the United States and Germany and also Great Britain. Now, Leibniz was confronted by something called empiricism. And the empiricist policy was you could not know anything outside of sense experience. That all knowledge comes from sense experience, and that from the memory of sense experiences you get images, from images you get thoughts, from thoughts you get ideas, and so forth. There is that when a human being is born, the human being is by nature has nothing in the mind, has nothing. The position of the tradition of Leibniz, going back to Kepler and Kusa, is that no, the human being is born without knowledge, but is born with a capacity for judgment, for distinguishing, for judgment. And so one of these empiricists in Germany at this time, at the end of the time of Franklin, at the end of the 1700s, changed his mind and said, I'm not for empiricism. I'm for a solution to this thing between Leibniz and I'm giving you the dumbed down version. I'm sorry about that, but I'm for the solution, and the solution lies in the following: that there are pre-existing concepts, or what he called categories, in the mind when you are born, but there's no knowledge there. And then there's sense experience, and there's no knowledge of sense experience. And that human being applies these pre-existing categories to knowledge, to the experience, and that creates the knowledge. And he had 12 categories, and he called these a priori categories. And they're a lot like Aristotle, they're like quantity and space and those kind of things. But they're categories that he imposes upon. Okay. Now, so now he's saying that human beings have a way through these fixed categories, which he considered universal in all human beings, to combine with experience to have a sense of reality. But then he also said that reality, that knowledge, is not the knowledge of the real world in and of itself, because that is outside of that. How things really are in the real world is outside of these categories and sense experience. Okay? And so he called one phenomena, meaning what you essentially come to know through the categories and experience. He called the other one noumena, meaning it's out there, it's not known. And that's the world as it really is without the human knowledge. Okay, now why is this important? I'll get to that. In the meantime, the people pushed Kant, and Leibniz was forgotten. And modern philosophy emerged with Kant, and Leibniz was forgotten. Now, when LaRouche was a teenager, he was reading Leibniz and he was reading Kant. And he spent many decades reading Kant, trying to figure this thing out. And whether or not what I'm going to tell you is what he actually resolved, how he resolved it or not, I don't know. So this distinction between the so-called noumena, the world you cannot know, and the world a phenomena that you can know, or that you end up knowing, is something that became plagued. In the 1800s it began to take over, in the 1900s it started to take over. And from there, a whole slew of philosophers took off into that realm. in their own way. And now, the next philosopher that I looked at who took off from this, his name is Hegel. And he had this idea that all these phenomena, each individual has their own interpretation of phenomena. And when that phenomena erupts in a social sense, in a certain context, it becomes the culture. It becomes ideas. It becomes this and that. And when and he called one the thesis, that is he calls it the subjective world. And then the objective world is when these things erupt into becoming objective to the people as a group, as a whole. And then that conflict leads to religion, law, government, and so forth. And so that's how you go from the subjective realm of phenomena to the objective realm of culture and then eventually the realm of religion and what have you. And what he was basically saying is that you have this thing of thesis, antithesis, and and that this is how history works, this is how everything works. And Marx took that and he developed his theory of class, conflict and all of it, partly based on Hegel, though I wouldn't. And so what Hegel is said essentially is that Plato and his opponents were synthesized by Aristotle, and Leibniz and his opponents were synthesized by Kant. So this is how he's looking at it. But it's all based on this idea that you can't really know the real universe as it is for itself. Okay? And you can't really know because you're a person and you have only these categories. Of course, Hegel came up with a whole bunch of other categories, that are a priori or that are before you know. So then Hegel and these other people they began to based on this, they began to distinguish between the natural sciences and philosophy, religion, the arts. And that these were two different things, and they were divorced from one another. So this was a different world of experiments and what have you, and this was more subjective. This was more subjective. And so we began to have the divorce of culture from science, and science from culture. Then later on, in the later 1800s, you had the attack on, you had Nietzsche, right? And then you had the attack, you had the Romantics. And then you had, this view is then transferred into an attack on classical culture. Because classical culture is repressive. Right? It's repressive because it says there is a process of development which is not arbitrary and is not and that the human mind has access to. So we have this development. Then this finally ends up in something called Heidegger. And this guy, you cannot read him and understand him without losing your sense of understanding. And then people say that he can't be understood unless you read all the people who interpret him. If you read all the people who interpret him, maybe you can understand what he's saying. Now, basically, what Heidegger is saying is that this phenomenology, which means this you as a person have these capabilities and you are thrown into a situation and you cannot know. You can only react. And there is no God, there is no good. It's only you acting as an animal in your own, kind of like an animal, in your own survival instinct in whatever situation you're in. And reality is your narrative. That is, you have a reality. Now, out of this also you get, out of this phenomena thing, you get people like John Dewey, who played a very important role in education. And John Dewey develops the idea that there is no truth. Each person has a different truth. And this comes in with John Dewey and his version of pragmatism. I'm not saying all pragmatist philosophers believe that. I'm just saying his version of pragmatism is that. So you start to break down the belief that human beings can know truth. Now, Kant is absolutely wrong in his noumena and phenomena. He's absolutely wrong in this distinction. Human beings can, in a social sense, and as individuals, through the exertion of examination of their way they think and what they believe in or what they think is reality, through great imagination and culture and the eruptions of the preconscious and the subconscious, they can make discoveries of principle in the physical world, which, when shown to be experimentally true, and which is shown to be, when it's socialized, can fundamentally alter the conditions on this planet, and potentially the conditions of the solar system and beyond. What does that say? That cannot happen if there is this complete division between these two things, which is where Leibniz's idea would be coherent with that. Because the way Leibniz looked at causality was based on monads, not based on categories. The universe is a monad, an individual is a monad, an atom is a monad, and there's a relationship between the macrocosm and the microcosm. And that changes that go on are on that level of the relationship of the microcosm and the macrocosm. All of that, it disappears with Kant. And all of that, ultimately, over several centuries, disappeared completely from science and from philosophy. But it started with philosophy first. The last two scientists who had this worldview were Einstein and Vernadsky. Sorry. And Vernadsky looked at this process of discovery as being the same process as light coming onto the land and then developing and then increasing the energy. And he saw the evolutionary process as a process that is coherent with the actual way the universe is, not a static system, but an evolving system. And the fact that we know, because we are human agents of the reorganization of the universe, we therefore can know. It's not easy, it's not complete, but we can know, we can make discoveries. And when Xi Jinping is saying these scientific discoveries are the basis of the future, that is huge. It's not LaRouche proved, but in this way LaRouche proved, through this economic science, through the development of, well, Vernadsky called it the noosphere, meaning the part of that planet, which is based on man's based on man's interventions and changes of the planet. What LaRouche says is that by demonstrating a capacity for relative increased population density, that human beings are demonstrating their actual capability to know the real universe, or in part the real universe, or in a limited sense the real universe, and the ability to change the real universe through that knowledge. And that is a refutation of Kant, Hegel, all these guys. And that's why LaRouche is a problem. Because he through his examination of an economy and the relationship of culture, economics, the division of labor, scientific discoveries, and so forth and so on, this is LaRouche's economics. And this is what has freaked everybody out since he started doing this in the early 50s. But it's a refutation of this philosophical movement that really takes off around Immanuel Kant. Now, somebody who was alive during Kant's period, but actually who was a great poet, a great historian, and launched a German Renaissance. His name is Friedrich Schiller. He wrote something called the Aesthetical Letters as an answer to Kant. That what Kant is describing about human beings is not the case. That human beings operate on a very different manner based on a relationship of, and we're going to be reading the Aesthetical Letters of Schiller. Now, the other great German poet was Heine. And he compared Kant to Robespierre in the French Revolution, who cut off people's heads. And I guess he was saying Kant was cutting off people's minds. So this is an area that I'm just kind of glossing over, and I apologize for that, but this is an area that we're going to be looking into, I'm looking into. Because this gets to the modern period. What do we have with our population? In my view, we have, culturally, we have Bertrand Russell on one end, but we have culturally, we have a population of my generation, and especially the younger generations. They have been reduced to a Heideggerian beast. Their narrative is the only thing that exists. There is no future. There is no nation to die for. There is no religion. There is no God except some kind of emotional thing with the charismatic thing where you have these emotional it's almost like a drug. And there's nothing. And and then what are you based on? Well, my identity, my narrative, my thing. And then you organize all these things into a berserker thing, because what is LaRouche saying? He's saying that you have to have a directionality, you have to have a future. And so anybody that's saying that is coming under attack. And you have a population which is increasingly devoid of a sense of a purpose or a future. And this is, I consider this to be, now Heidegger had many followers. They were leftists, they were right-wingers, but he was a hardcore supporter of Adolf Hitler. He was involved in Hitler's whole thing. One of his closest friends was the guy who inspired Hitler's racial hygiene laws, this guy Fischer. But he's been retooled in the modern period. The neoconservatives subscribe to him. The radical left subscribe to him. All these different people subscribe to his philosophy, which they all